Hey everyone, William here with Imaging Resource, and in this video I want to share with you a series of my favorite tips for bird photography, although most of these tips can also work for general wildlife photography as well. Now, I'm not a professional wildlife photographer, more of an enthusiast, but I am a professional camera reviewer, and I always try to incorporate some wildlife photos into my reviews whenever I can. And I know a lot of you all like to shoot wildlife photography as well. Over the years, I've compiled a variety of tips and techniques that I try to incorporate when I go out to shoot wildlife. I'm going to share with you some of those today. Now, before we start, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Olympus, who helped make this project possible. They've asked us to showcase their new 150 to 400mm Pro lens, which, as you might imagine, makes for an excellent lens for birding and wildlife photography. While all these tips and techniques in this video can be performed with nearly any camera and ideally a super telephoto lens, there are several advantages to a mirrorless camera and this new 150 to 400mm lens that I'm going to highlight along the way. So if you're looking to brush up on your bird photography skills or add a few more techniques to your tool belt, let's dive on in. Let's start with some gear related tips. The first one here, find yourself a long telephoto lens. The first one is a pretty important one and perhaps a fairly obvious one, but for excellent bird photos, you're going to want a long super telephoto lens. In my experience, the longer the better, but a good starting point is around 400mm. I tend to find myself photographing small songbirds, which are both small and often far away, so I like having as much reach as possible. Small songbirds in particular are often farther away than you might realize, so getting a lens that's as long as possible can really help bring that faraway subject up close, as well as really isolate it with good subject isolation and background blurring. The new Olympus 150 to 400mm Pro lens is pretty stellar in this regard. Not only does it offer a fantastically versatile 300 to 800mm equivalent zoom range, but the lens also has a built-in teleconverter. So at the flick of a switch on the side of the lens, the built-in 1.25x teleconverter boosts the lens reach out to 500mm or 1000mm equivalent. That's an insane amount of telephoto reach in a surprisingly lightweight and hand-holdable lens. With the telephoto lens, you're able to bring faraway subjects closer in, and one of the best creative benefits to such a lens is the ability to isolate your subject and create smooth, blurry backgrounds. The ability to remove distractions is one of the great benefits to a telephoto lens. One of the tips that I try to keep in mind, and sometimes fail at myself, is pay attention to the background. Be mindful of leaves, tree branches, or other objects that are positioned behind your subject. I often find myself concentrating more on nailing focus on the bird or waiting for a pleasing pose, only to later realize that there's a distracting branch or a bunch of leaves behind the subject. With a narrow field of view of a super telephoto lens, only a small amount of movement or shift in your angle or position can make a big difference, so try to reposition yourself and keep in mind the background behind your subject. When photographing birds in particular, you'll likely find yourself pointing upwards into the trees. While this can work and can sometimes make for some interesting images, oftentimes you'll be photographing the underside of the animal, which might not be the most attractive pose or position. If possible, try to position yourself at a different elevation, or more at the same level of the bird. This is more easily accomplished when photographing near bird feeders, or if you're fortunate enough to find yourself in a location with elevated walkways or trails that can put you more up into the tree level. For shorebirds, water birds, or other ground birds, another great option is to get down low to the ground, getting you close to eye level. Getting down low can help create a really pleasing look to the water and really emphasizes the shallow depth of field and makes your subject stand out more. Next, an important one, if possible, try to position yourself so that the sun is behind you. That way, you're positioned so the sun is illuminating your subject, the bird, rather than the other way around. You don't want to be photographing a bird with the sun behind it, as it will likely be harshly backlit and underexposed. With the sun illuminating the bird, you're able to capture all the beautiful colors and feather detail of your subject. Similarly, when photographing birds in flight, keep in mind the time of day. Much like the golden hours for landscape photography, these are also ideal lighting conditions for photographing birds in flight. If the sun is too high in the sky, the underside of the bird will likely be in shadow. Another important tip is to keep an eye on your shutter speed, especially using a faster shutter speed for sharper photos, especially for birds in flight. The traditional rule of thumb has been using a shutter speed of 1 over the focal length of the lens in a full-frame camera. So for example, for a 500mm lens, a good starting point is 1/500th of a second, in order to avoid blurring from camera shake. This means the longer the lens though, the faster the shutter speed needs to be. Now for birds in flight, a good starting point here is 1/1000th of a second. but I'd recommend shooting with even faster speeds. 1/1000th is a minimum here. You'll probably get better results if you shoot with even faster shutter speeds, like 1/2000th of a second perhaps. Now with the Olympus OMD systems, these cameras, especially the new EM1X and the EM1 Mark III, have amazingly powerful in-body image stabilization, some of, if not the best IS tech that we've seen in the industry. Now having great IS isn't going to help you in every situation, but when photographing birds that are perched or other slow-moving wildlife, the image stabilization system allows me to shoot at a slower shutter speed and thus a lower ISO setting. With the 150 to 400mm lens in particular, this is another Olympus Pro lens that has built-in optical image stabilization, which works together with OMD cameras' in-body IS systems. So when paired up with the EM1X or the EM1 Mark III, the 150 to 400mm Sync IS system can offer up to 8 stops of IS at 150 or 6 stops of IS at 500mm, which is 400mm plus the built-in teleconverter. That is just some all-around impressive image stabilization. Many full-frame format super telephoto lenses can be quite large and heavy, so another great tip to keep in mind is using a tripod or monopod. Many of these lenses can hit the 6, 7, or 8 pound range, which can get very tiring to use handheld for any length of time, and birding and wildlife photography takes patience. Tired arms and general soreness means less steady hand-holding, which can result in missed shots, blurriness, or missed focus, and just generally less enthusiasm to keep shooting. Now, one of the benefits in particular to the new Olympus 150 to 400 is that despite its appearance as a big, long, heavy lens, it's actually surprisingly lightweight for its size. The barrel is made from a lightweight magnesium alloy, and thanks to the Micro Four Thirds platform, the lens elements are both small and light. All told, the lens itself is only about 4.4 pounds, or just under 2 kilograms. And with the EM1X attached, that pair only weighs about 6.7 pounds. It's a rig that's easy to hike around with and use handheld all day. These last two tips are more general bird and wildlife photography advice rather than gear-related or technique. While it's certainly fun to explore a new location sight unseen, but it helps to have some familiarity with your location to help better your chances for successful photography. Is your shooting location on private property? Is it a state park or a local park? And if so, are there any hour restrictions for when you can be there? Are you able to get there and be in the park at the best hours of the day, such as during golden hour? Are there any access fees involved? It's also good to know how crowded a place might be. There are several parks, including a national recreation area where I live, and while it's a great spot to get out and explore nature, it can often be crowded with other people, especially in good weather and on the weekends. Also, rather than standard parks, which might be more crowded, I also tend to look for special wildlife refuges or nature preserves that can be much better and more conducive to wildlife photography. And last but certainly not least, be patient. Birds and wildlife are unpredictable, and they won't often land or appear right where you want them. That's part of the fun though, the unpredictability. But bird photography takes patience. Exploring through the woods will alert most critters to your presence, so you'll want to find yourself a good spot and just wait. Eventually, the birds will likely start to ignore you or be okay with your presence and begin to reappear, so long as you remain calm and quiet. It also probably helps not to wear a bright orange jacket like I have been during this video. Along the same lines as being patient, it also pays to be diligent and observe your subject once you've spotted it. Don't just snap the first frame and call it a day. Watch for interesting behavior or certain poses that can bring the subject to life and show some personality. You'll walk away with a much more interesting photo that way. One of the nice benefits to many modern mirrorless cameras such as the OMD system is the ability to shoot with a silent burst mode. Thanks to the fast electronic shutter, you can fire off multiple frames very quickly and silently without disturbing your often skittish subjects, and better your chances for capturing an interesting photo. I hope you've enjoyed that list of tips and techniques for bird and wildlife photography. If you have some favorite tips that you'd like to share, jump down into the comments below. Also, be sure to check out our in-depth review of the Olympus 150 to 400mm lens. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you all in the next one. It's a duck.
That's cool.
Hold on, stop guys.
Good sign.
Also, if you'd like to check out our in-depth review of the Olympus 150 to 400mm lens, where you have... Also, if you... Nope. What are you doing? What's that? What does this mean?
I was just trying to relax.
Oh, okay. Also, if you'd like to check out our in-depth review on the Olympus 150 to